Keir Starmer defends inheritance tax changes amid farmer outrage, an analysis of the growing divide. So, let's dive into the recent controversy surrounding inheritance tax and how it's affecting farmers in the UK. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has come under fire for defending changes to inheritance tax on farms. Yeah, this issue has sparked outrage among farmers, with many feeling squeezed out of the agricultural land market due to competition from wealthy investors. Yeah, it's a complex situation, so let's break it down and explore what's really going on. The core issue: tax changes and wealthy investors. Right, here's the deal. Inheritance tax on farms has always been a sensitive topic, but recent changes announced in last month's budget have pushed it into the spotlight. Farmers are claiming these changes could hit their livelihoods hard. But Starmer, he seems pretty confident that most farmers won't be affected. Speaking ahead of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, he reassured reporters that the vast majority of farming families would remain exempt from the new rules. Now, this isn't just about tax policy. It's about who owns the land and how it's used. A Labour analysis highlights a troubling trend. Over the past decade, there's been a sharp increase in wealthy individuals and institutions buying up farmland. By last year, non-farmers were responsible for 56% of farmland purchases, compared to less than a third in 2010. Yeah, that's a huge shift. And here's the kicker. Many of these new landowners aren't using the land for farming. The analysis links this to financial advice encouraging investors to buy farmland for the tax breaks, rather than for agricultural production. So, what happens to the land? A lot of it just sits there unused. According to official statistics, 400,000 hectares of agricultural land were taken out of use for farming in the last year alone. Labour's stance, asking the rich to pay more. Labour is framing this as an issue of fairness. A party source explained that the policy targets rich estates and farms with the highest values, asking them to pay their fair share. Yeah, the idea is to use this revenue to fund public services, especially in rural areas. But that explanation hasn't gone down well with farmers, who feel they're being unfairly targeted. Farmers' anger, a sense of betrayal. Okay, so let's talk about the farmers' perspective. The National Farmers Union, NFU, has been vocal in its opposition, with its president, Tom Bradshaw, calling the policy a betrayal. He's warned that the new tax rules could devastate farming families, particularly those who've already invested heavily in their land and equipment. Bradshaw explained that many farmers would struggle to raise the money needed to pay the tax. Why? Because, farming isn't exactly a high-margin industry. Most profits are reinvested into production. This could have a knock-on effect on long-term food security, as farmers might be forced to sell off land or reduce their output. The human impact, older farmers at risk. And then there's the emotional toll. Yeah, Bradshaw highlighted the challenges faced by older farmers, especially those who've lost a spouse or are nearing retirement. Many of them have spent their entire lives building their farms and producing food for the country. Now they're being asked to navigate a complete new tax system with little time or resources to adapt. Bradshaw described this as a betrayal, saying, "The human impact of this is simply not acceptable." That's pretty strong language, and it reflects the depth of frustration among farmers. Protests and the NFU's stance. The anger has boiled over into protests. Thousands of farmers are expected to rally in central London, demanding that the government reconsider the tax changes. Some farmers have even suggested refusing to supply supermarkets as a form of protest. But the NFU has distanced itself from this idea. Bradshaw was clear. That is not an NFU tactic. We do not support emptying supermarket shelves. However, he acknowledged the strong emotions driving these suggestions. It's a tough balance to strike between expressing legitimate grievances and maintaining public support. The NFU has also cautioned farmers against bringing heavy machinery to the protests. Yeah, they're trying to avoid scenes like those in other countries, where farmers have used tractors to block roads. Starmer's response: reassurance and police involvement. Starmer, meanwhile, has defended the policy while acknowledging farmers' concerns. He's emphasized the government's investment in farming, calling it quite considerable. But he's also stressed the importance of communicating how the new rules will work. For example, he pointed out that typical farming families wouldn't pay inheritance tax unless their estates exceeded PS 3 million. Yeah, there's a PS 3 million threshold, which includes exemptions for farm property, spouse-to-spouse transfers, and parent-to-child transfers. Even then, the tax rate would be 20%, payable over 10 years. Starmer said, "That's why I am absolutely confident the vast majority of farms and farmers will not be affected by this." But the protest suggests this message isn't resonating with farmers. As for the protests themselves, Starmer has said farmers have every right to express their views. However, he's also warned that the police will respond appropriately if the demonstrations disrupt public order. Yeah, it's a delicate balance between supporting free expression and maintaining law and order. What's next? The bigger picture. Okay, so what does this all mean for the future of farming in the UK? The inheritance tax changes are just one piece of a larger puzzle. The growing influence of wealthy investors in the agricultural land market raises questions about who really controls the country's farmland. Are we moving towards a system where land is treated more as a financial asset than a source of food production? And then there's the issue of rural communities. Yeah, Labour argues that the tax revenue will be used to support public services in these areas, but if the policy pushes more farmers out of business, what happens to those communities? Final thoughts. So, yeah, this is a deeply divisive issue, with no easy answers. On one hand, Labour's focus on fairness and public services is commendable. But the policy's potential impact on farmers and food security can't be ignored. Starmer's challenge will be to convince farmers that the new rules are fair and manageable while addressing the broader issues of land ownership and agricultural sustainability. It's a tough balancing act, and the coming weeks will be crucial in determining how this plays out. What do you think? Are the tax changes a step in the right direction, or are they unfairly targeting farmers? Let's talk about it in the comments below.